Once, one of my close friends said to me that the arrival of our third child, Jeremy, did not go as smoothly as our first two. Shortly after birth, he was diagnosed with an infection which would require a course of antibiotics. The memory of accompanying the doctor to the intensive care unit and watching him attempt to insert a cannula needle into the tiny wrist of our baby boy is forever imprinted on our memory. I was tasked with feeding Jeremy with drops of sugary water as the doctor manipulated his wrist, attempting several times to find a suitable vein that would allow passage for the antibiotics to enter his system and flush out the infection. But no amount of sucrose solution from my plastic syringe could undo the fact that it was a painful business. How I wished I could explain to my bawling newborn, not yet 24 hours old, that the doctor wasn't being horrid. He was being helpful, that the pain of the needle was necessary, that this wouldn't last forever, that I loved him since that day. And with Jeremy now a healthy, boisterous 5-year-old, I have often thought about the way that experience could be compared to the way we are often unable to recognize the purpose that may accompany suffering in our own lives. We are not able to see the big picture in the way that God sees it. We see only the present pain, the sting of the needle. God is the parent who is with us in our suffering, yet also sees the end from the beginning in ways that we cannot fathom. Yet, before we present any apologetic on pain, it is important to remember that people who are actually going through suffering need our love, not our logic. They need someone to sit with them, weep with them, not to present a 3-point sermon on why God allows evil. So, in presenting 3 reasons why God may allow suffering to touch our lives. First, because God won't rob us of free will. The problem of suffering is usually posed as a question. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why does He allow evil to exist in the world? Perhaps the most common response is known as the free will defense. After all, where does most of the evil in this world come from? Much of it is a direct consequence of our wrong choices as human beings. Yet, one of the greatest goods that God has given us is free will, the ability to choose between right and wrong. The problem is that many people choose to do evil rather than good. Imagine if God intervened at every moment anyone was going to make a wrong choice. Free will would no longer exist. If God waved His magic wand every time we made a bad choice, we would merely be puppets controlled by a puppeteer who overruled our thoughts and actions. Would we want to live in such a world? Even if it meant we were insulated from suffering? Could we even speak of concepts such as love without it being something freely given and freely rejected? The great gift of freedom and love that God has given us comes at the cost of the evil that people freely choose to carry out in the world. Second, because we live in a broken world. But why has God allowed death, disease, and natural disaster to exist at all? This question can only be answered by a Christian from within their own worldview, and means we must expand our perspective to a cosmic scale. The Apostle Paul states that we know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. We believe, then, that the whole created order is in some sense out of kilter at a cosmic level. Some theologians trace this to human rebellion, an outworking of the fall, which acts both forward and backwards in time. Others point to the existence of an earlier rebellion in the angelic realm that sparked a cosmic fall. Whatever the origin, the result is a world that is not as it should be. Yet, poll includes the promise that one day the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. So we live in the tension of a broken world that is awaiting renewal. The natural laws that operate are both a blessing and a curse. Tectonic plate activity renews the surface of the earth with minerals, yet wreaks havoc when humans build cities on the fault lines. Self-replication allows our bodies to grow and develop, yet can result in cancer when natural processes misfire. Death is a necessary part of the cycle of life, yet still remains our last enemy. Third, because suffering can draw people to God. Underlying many people's questions about suffering is an assumption about God's purpose in creating us. We must ask the question, what does a loving God want for the human beings He created? Here are two possible answers. It's God's job to keep human beings happy, comfortable, and pain-free. That's what a lot of people assume is meant by God being loving. But there is another possible answer. God's purpose for human beings is to bring them to know and love Him. Those are two very different responses. Coming to know and love, God may be quite different to Him, keeping us comfortable and happy. The reality is that comfort tends to make us forget about God. It's evidenced by a prosperous Western world where belief in God is increasingly absent. Yet, Christianity often thrives in places which are experiencing the fires of persecution or hardship. While I don't believe that God directly causes pain and suffering, I do believe that God is masterful enough to weave all the experiences and tribulations of our life into a tapestry that is ultimately beautiful, and if we allow Him, draws us towards being the people He wants us to be. Do these brief reasons answer all the questions posed by suffering? Of course not. There is much more than could be said, a great deal of mystery, and many more questions that could be asked. For instance, could God have created a possible world in which pain and suffering do not exist and still fulfills our human needs? Perhaps, but what if we are already living in the best of all possible worlds this side of heaven? That may seem absurd suggestion when we look at all the suffering and evil on our earth. Yet, I would argue that a world in which Jesus stepped into His broken creation and freely gave His life on the cross to demonstrate the supreme love of God is in fact the best possible kind of world we could hope for. Thanks for watching the video of Awakening Words. Always be happy and stay motivated.